Hi there, this is Carl Irwin, and today we're going to be looking at scoring for a different type of media. So this is not film score, but it's very much related to film score. This is the arena of games, so game music, which actually can be used for film score, particularly for trailers and other kinds of media, because game music is typically constructed on loops. It's based on material that can repeat and can be layered. And this is very powerful, particularly for kind of stock audio music library sort of underscore. So this can be used in film for sure, and other kinds of visual media, sort of as an underscore element. I think it suffers in terms of its specificity, its ability to actually hit marks in within cues within a film, and for that you'd want to look at the other discussions that we've had about composing to picture. But nonetheless, this type of music can be applied to film, like I said, particularly in kind of a trailer sort of atmosphere, or in a low budget film where you can't really hire a composer to compose very specific music to a picture. You can use this kind of material, this library type material. However, this is really best used for games. So what we're looking at is looping. In this case, we're going to keep this simple. We're going to loop 8 measures. So what I have here is an orchestral template with 8 measures plus 2. So we have 10 measures, 2 measures here out on the end, because we're going to need this sound out here in our final render for decay. That will actually be important to the final files that we're going to be putting into our library. So we're going to write, though, only 8 measures of music. I've set a tempo here at 120 beats per minute. We're going to keep this very simple. So it'll be 16 seconds of time is what we're going to be dealing with. There's 2 beats per second. So with 4 beats per measure, that's 2 seconds per measure, which gets us to 16 total seconds. So that's the kind of the limitation of our issues with mathematical timing. We're just kind of determining how long this is going to last. Keep it simple. You can do any kind of tempo that you want. It doesn't even really have to conform to a certain time period. It's just good to know your information so that whenever you share or package your library music, if that's what you're doing this for, that you can say how long it is. In this case, it'll be 16 seconds of music. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to compose in a modular way. So I'm going to compose a section of the ensemble, and then we're going to compose material for another section of the ensemble, but we're always going to be mindful of keeping all of these sections kind of autonomous and self-sufficient, so that you could remove what we call a stem of music, just the string section, or just the percussion, or just the winds in this case. And you can make as many stems as you want, but we could remove any one of these groups and they could have a loop just to themselves, so that you could have a winds loop, you could have a percussion loop, you could have a strings loop, and then these loops could be layered on top of each other to give you a full ensemble. So we're going to compose all together, but when we get to the point of export, we're going to deal with individual groups, and we want to make sure that our music that we're writing is autonomous to those groups, that we don't need to depend on the other sections in the ensemble, that each section can have its own completely fully realized bit of music. Okay, so let's focus on the string section first, and I'm going to incorporate the piano also with the string section. So let's compose just it's a very basic 8 measure piece of music. I think what we're going to go with is kind of obviously the FPS kind of game is very popular, so you want to have that music going on underneath. This is going to be kind of a warfare game, but we're going to make it classical music, so kind of a classic war sort of sound, military sort of action cue. So let's get into it, and we'll author some material here and see what we come up with. Okay, so this is what I've come up with. I started with the string section, and then I added some piano material over the top. And as I got into this, I realized I might actually want to separate in the end. I might want to separate my piano from the strings. I might incorporate the piano in the percussion, because as I'm looking at my percussion complement, apart from the glockenspiel and the timpani, there's not really any melodic instruments in this percussion section. I'm using just a bass drum, snare drum, a couple of cymbals. So I may incorporate the piano into that percussion stem. So we'll see when we get to that point. But here it is. We have a full string complement plus a sub bass that I like to put in as a synthesizer sound, and then my piano complement up here on the top. Again, we're stopping at 8 measures plus 2 measures on the end for decay. So let's see what we have. And that's it. So what's going on here? We have a very basic chord changes, extremely basic. Just this is diatonic harmony. There's nothing interesting going on. You could make a much longer loop and have it harmonically more interesting. You could kind of make it go different places. But in general, in game scoring, it's really quiet. The game music is usually very background, and it only changes in texture as elements of the game change. As you're doing better in the game, another layer will come in. As you're doing worse, another different layer will come in. But the loops kind of maintain all the way through, and we want them to be as vanilla as possible. Okay, so this is kind of different from film score. We really want this to be quite vanilla. We want this to feel like it's not really going anywhere, that it's really staying in one place. And in that respect, writing video game music can be very unrewarding for most types, unless you're composing to a cutscene or something like that, because it doesn't really offer a lot of opportunity for harmonic diversity. Nonetheless, we serve the purpose, which is the game, right? So that's what we have. Very, very simple harmonic progression, hardly any at all. Now what we want to do is we're going to compose additional sounds. We're going to go up to the winds. And what we want to do is we want to sort of copy the essence of what's going on down here. As you hear, this can really sit by itself. You know, this is music all by itself. We want to compose our winds to be similar but different. We want to be using different conventions, but we also want all of the wind section, which we have quite a few instruments here, brass and woodwinds. We want all of the wind section to be able to be a sufficient loop as well. So let's we may copy and paste a little bit and write a couple of new concepts, maybe a few rips in the brass section, a few runs in the woodwinds. Let's see what we come up with. Okay, so here's our wind complement, and you see I've got the brass playing some droney sort of things on the bottom, that very stereotypical action movie, action game kind of heavy, low drone hits in the trombone tuba. And then I've got a couple of rips in the horns and a couple of fanfare figures in the trumpets, and then some runs and a little bit of emulation of what's going on in the strings and the woodwinds. A run at the end, some trilly kinds of frilly ideas going on up here. A few things about the notation. We're going for the output. This is not to be read by any instrumentalist. We want our mock-up to sound as genuine as possible. So I'm using some unorthodox notation, as we did in the film score projects that we looked at inside of Musescore. I have a tie here so that the glissando, the rip, will happen late on the beat. And you wouldn't necessarily write it this way. I'm also using articulations, as you noticed in the strings. I've got some of these roll figures and specific articulations that I'm using because I like those samples, and I like the way that these playback figures work in the Muse Sounds play engine. They get closer to what I want. So a couple of scoops and a few different things going on here. We're not going after a particular style of playing. We're really just trying to get the samples that we want to play when we want them, the way that we want them. So quite a mix, mash of dynamics as well to get the sound that we want. So let's hear what this all sounds like all together. In fact, we'll zoom out a little bit so you can see everything a little bit better. And you can see we don't go to that resolution on beat 1. We stop there because this is going to be a loop, and we're going to take the decay that we get from this and then incorporate it into our loop. So that's it. One thing about this kind of orchestration is you always want to try to find the holes and the gaps and fill them in. You don't want everything to be playing all the time. You want some, because the music doesn't go anywhere harmonically, because it is very much in service to the underscore of the gameplay, you do want to take advantage of what you can to make it diverse. And here we have a few holes and places where we can fit instruments in there. So these fanfares and rips happen in kind of the blank space after the drone hits. Same thing for the woodwinds. They kind of happen around other things that are occurring. And then we have this kind of culmination of a fanfare and runs happening at the very end to take us back home to the beginning of the loop. So just so you can see what this sounds like by itself, let's just select all of the wind parts, and we'll play this loop again. So this will just play back now just the winds, and you can see that this is an autonomous section. This can really suffice by itself, just like the strings. So you might have a moment in the game where in the logic you would program that if the character is not doing very well or things are quiet and mysterious or something like that, that you would just cut to this one loop. And it's a little bit more sparse than the string one, a little less driving, a little bit more atmospheric with these little stings and hits happening in there. So this is fully self-sufficient by itself, but it can also play with the strings. And it works. Okay. So the last part here, let's dive into the percussion. And I'm going to incorporate the piano with the percussion, but I want to fill this out with some of the rhythmic material that we're seeing up here. We're going to double some of the rhythms, see if we can get a percussion complement that can sit all by itself. Okay, so we have some percussion material written in. You see that I've got a lot of doubling here. I'm going for just kind of a big otherworldly sort of drum sound, and I'm combining a crash cymbal, snare drum, bass drum, simple orchestral percussion. We're not going for anything exotic, but we're going to try to make it sound a little bit more exotic. So I've got kind of a very low dynamic mezzo piano on the snare drum, crash cymbal, and much louder on the bass drum. And then we have some suspended cymbal glue here tying together parts of the phrasing. And then that plus the timpani, which is kind of droning on this A, holding down the tonal center of the piece, except for this little lick at the end. Except for that, the piano is really going to keep this together. So let's select all of this and listen to it together, and then we'll examine each different stem that we have. So we'll select everything down to piano, and you can hear this by itself. So you can see how that works, a little bit of chordal stuff going on, really just octaves being played here in the glockenspiel. This helps to accentuate the fact that there are some chords moving. There's some harmonic movement, not very much, but there is a little bit going on down here, and this just gives a little bit more tonal variety to it. Not very loud, mezzo forte, just kind of a little twinkle over the top of everything, but really the piano drives this. So that's the percussion stem. You've already heard the string stem. This is everything all in fact, I'm not sure, we didn't listen to the string stem by itself without the piano, so let's just get that. We'll take the piano out of it, and here's the string stem by itself. Okay, so you can see that that does work, even without the piano. And then here's the entire thing. Let me just zoom out so you can sort of see the bigger picture. This is the whole thing. Let's see what we get. So there it is, okay? What you would do now is you would export each stem, but first what I'm going to do is I'm going to export the entire thing. So we'll go up here to File, we'll go to Export, we're going to select Wave. We're going to export the entire main score to a loop, and then what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll export each stem as a loop. Okay, so I just want to show you probably the best way to deal with exporting stems is to create a new file where you just delete all the material you don't want and then export from there. So we go, this is the wind stem. I've deleted everything else, and we're going to export this. So I've just made a new file. Be very careful about deleting large portions of your working file. You want to make a new file and then delete and then go from there. So we'll export from here, and then we can just export the main score. Now the reason why we need to do this is because you can see on PDF export, you have this option to all parts combined to one file, meaning that you would export the score and then each individual part. And then that would become one PDF file. But it doesn't really give us that option under the audio. You can't really take each individual one and then combine just the ones that you want. It doesn't really give us that option right now. So what you're going to do is you're going to delete what you don't want and then export the main score for each one of your stems. So we'll do this for winds, percussion, and strings. And one last thing I'm going to do here so that we have enough material to work with is I've created a sting. This is just one fragment of music based on the material that we had earlier. And this is something that someone can program in for an ending moment or an integral moment in the action. You can do as many stings as you want for as many different types of scenarios as you like, but it's just a very short musical fragment. This will not get looped. This will be exported all by itself and will become its own WAV file, but this is what I've composed. So it's really just part of that closing fanfare truncated with an ending note. And I may actually steal that ending note as its own audio file to make an end cap to the piece. So now we're going to take our exported audio files and go to an audio editor and then create our loops. Okay, so we'll do this one time with one of our files, but then you would just repeat this for all of the other files that you're working with. So we're going to create a loop from this. We know that our sound should go out to 16 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select at 16. I'm going to zoom in and try to get as specific as I can. If you do this very close up for all of your loops, you will get you will be close enough for everything. So we just want to be as specific as possible. We're looking for that exact point of 16 seconds, 16-0. So we can find it right here. Here is 16-0, and I'm just going to select right on that, right at that point, and we're going to split at this point. So you can see how far we are in on the data here. We're very extremely zoomed in. And I'm going to go to Edit in this program, which is Audacity. We'll hit Split. And now we have a split at that point, and we will zoom back out. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to knock this part off and move it to the front to create our loop. And you'll see how this will work. So I'm going to add another track. We'll add a new stereo track. And then I'm going to grab this end point. I'm going to drop it down here all the way back at the beginning, and we'll have it snap right to the start. So we want this to lock in and snap right there. And now we have essentially a loop. If we hit play, okay, so on our win stem, and you could do this for each stem, and you could also do it for the whole thing. You could just export that because a game developer might want the entire thing all together in one loop. You have as many configurations as you want, but at least we want to do each individual stem. So what we're going to do now is we're going to select the whole thing, and we're going to render this down together. So we'll mix and render it to a new track. And we don't need these original parts anymore. What we'll find now is that if we make a copy of this, Control-C and Control-V, and we slide them together, we'll probably hear a little click here. Listen. Actually, it went through pretty well. What we're going to do is we're going to ensure that we don't get any sort of clicking and clipping. And the way that we do that, we'll delete this one. We're going to go out here to the beginning, and we're going to zoom in really, really tight so that we can kind of see this little wave on the very end. I'm going to add a volume envelope, and we're going to zoom in a little bit more. I'm just going to put a fade effect. I'm just going to fade this down all the way to 0. So what I'm doing is I'm forcing a 0 crossing at the beginning of this. You can see this is extremely zoomed in. We're zoomed in very, very far. This is not a gap that will be heard. And then what I want to do is I want to go out to the end, and I'm going to do the same thing again. So we'll zoom in here way out at the end. Again, grab a waveform here, the last little bit of curve, and I'm going to place another 0 crossing. Now, also, you want to normalize everything too. I'm just really hitting on this aspect of looping. But before you do this, you'd want to normalize and compress and get everything kind of mastered the way that you want it. But this is just the general loop creation. Okay, so now what I have is I have a 0 crossing at both ends of this. And you won't hear that. You won't hear that gap. What I'm going to do is I'm going to render this out. And now we have that 0 crossing baked in, and we'll get a very, very clean loop. So we'll take this, and we'll add it over here. And now we'll hear a perfect loop. Perfect, okay? So now what you're dealing with is you have a very abrupt beginning and a very abrupt end. So what you can do is create material for that. You can cut off your decay and make a little file just for the decay that can be the end cap. And you can do it for all of the stems, and you can do it for the entire project as well, so that a person could add an end cap. You could put an effect on the end. You could take that decay that we had there and add a note to it. You could export just one direct hit and put that together with the decay, and then you'll have an end cap. You could also do an effect at the beginning. If you take your decay, in fact, let's try this real quick. We'll go all the way back to where we had our decay, and here's our decay sound. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this down here, and we'll solo this just for a minute, and I'm going to reverse it. So we'll take this effect and we'll add a reverse to this. And I'm also going to normalize it so we can really hear it. And I'm going to cut it, trim this down. I'm going to add a fade in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out to the end here. We'll put a little bit of a that 0 crossing trick We'll apply that here at the very end. So you can see the spot right at the very end where we get the last little bit of waveform. I'm going to take this and force a zero crossing right here, so it goes back to 0. And we'll zoom out. And I'm going to take this, and we're going to export it. So now that's baked in. And what we have now is we have an introductory sound. If you listen, this is a reverse sound. What you do is you create one of these and you can place it on the beginning of your loops. And because it's made up of the material that is the reverb on beat 1, it will be a perfect segue into your loops. So you can create a very, very generic, easy beginning cap file for your loops by doing that. Okay, so these are our final loops. I have up here the entire loop. It's been normalized, and then I've created my loop with the tail decay, and I've done my zero crossing on this, and then I also have a different stem for the winds, one for percussion, one for strings, and then also I've made up the following little pieces that can be used at the beginning, the end, or the middle. So I have this introductory reverse sound that we were looking at. I have a final note, which I created a little file for. And what I did is I incorporated the decay into this note so that it would sound like it belongs. So at the very end, when this gets tagged onto the end of any one of these sections, you're going to hear elements from that actual loop continuing into the decay, into the final hit. And then I have a swell. The swell is actually the decay reversed and then put back forward again and connected in the center. It gives you kind of this sort of electronic but somehow acoustic sort of, element, this noise element that comes in and then goes out. We'll look at that in a minute. And then also the sting, this little fanfare that I exported that could be used just about anywhere. So these are all the different sounds. Let's listen to each one of these, and then we'll see if we can construct something that would resemble what would happen maybe in the film project in the mix or in game logic. So now we have 2 iterations of the loop. And then also an introductory little element out here. Let's see what it sounds like. So we have some acceptable caps to this. We have a final note which fits together. It actually has the decay from the sound of the last few measures of this loop. And then we also have this part here at the beginning, which certainly does sound a little bit more electronic, a little bit more contemporary. But because it's made up of the sound that's actually being played from the decay, which was looped onto this looped piece, it actually makes the opening hit disappear. So just for context, if we listen to this by itself, slide this out, and you remember what this sounds like to start here. There's a first hit, but there's also the sound of decay that does not belong. With the use of this as our opening sound, if we're not going to fade it in and we need to hear the opening of it, we do have that more contemporary reversed effect, but it masks the presence of this decay from the original loop at the beginning of this piece of audio. So listen to this again now in context. It just clips and stops right there, but it continues on that beat. And then we can continue with the loop seamlessly thereafter. Nice and clean. Okay, and then at the very end we have one note incorporated with the decay that was already there. This sounds like a very aggressive attack. And these caps actually will work with just about any loop. So let's listen to some others here. We have down below, we have our loop for the winds. These are also normalized lower so that they can be stacked up without clipping as well. Okay, and then we have down here the percussion loop. Okay, and then down here we have the string loop. So let's construct something here using these loops. Okay, so we have a simple little project put together here. We have our percussion loop, and then we add the string loop, and then we add the winds loop, and then we end with our final hit. And we'll see how this incorporates together. So you can see these transitional moments are quite masked, even though there may be some material here on each one of these loops as they're added in that don't exist in the previous loop. Just the fact that there's something happening before it really covers for that. However, if you want to cover it even more, you can use something like this. So this is a reverse swell. And what we'll do is we'll just put a little bit of an envelope on this and make it a little bit softer. And you can hear this will cover up this transition even better. I don't think it needs it, but you could do it, or you could place this anywhere in your game logic as a response to something that happens in the game. Just a simple little sound there. So you listen to this sound by itself. And that's done by taking the decay material from the main loop and then reversing it on itself so that it comes in reverse and then goes out in normal time. So these are all the different parts, and of course you can have other elements too. Here's a sting, the sting that we created. Right, so that could be placed anywhere. You could have that happen at any moment based on something that happens in the game logic. Whatever the case may be. So this is, game library, audio, music library development, kind of in a very basic sense. You can make this as complex and intricate as you want and have as many different elements that can be kind of pieced together in a modular way and then distributed as a library or made for specific games, whatever the case may be. So hopefully you learned something from this and you have a way to apply it in your work. And I wish you the best of luck and happy mixing.